At Downton Abbey, life inside the grand estate often seemed timeless. But behind the glitter of chandeliers and the quiet hum of servants' footsteps, change was always waiting in the wings. Characters we loved were written off in shocking ways. Sometimes it was the writers making bold choices. Other times, it was the actors themselves who decided it was time to walk away. The truth is, Downton Abbey was never just about upstairs dinners or downstairs drama. It was about the people who brought those stories to life. And when one of them left, it didn't just shift the show, it shook the fans too. So why did so many beloved actors leave at the height of Downton's success? Some wanted freedom. Some feared being trapped in one role forever. Others faced the painful weight of contracts, health issues, or simply the pull of a new opportunity they couldn't ignore. Today, we're pulling back the curtain on 9 of those exits. And the real stories may surprise you. Let's begin with one of the most heartbreaking departures in the entire series, Dan Stevens. He was the golden boy of Downton Abbey, the charming and kind-hearted Matthew Crawley. From the moment he arrived at the estate, viewers were captivated by his journey. His romance with Lady Mary became the beating heart of the show. Their wedding was a moment fans had waited for with pure anticipation. And when their baby George was born, it felt like the Crawleys were entering a new golden age. Then came the Christmas special. Viewers tuned in ready for warmth, holiday spirit, and perhaps a happy ending. What they got instead was a devastating tragedy. Matthew, full of joy after meeting his newborn son, was suddenly taken from the world in a brutal car crash. Fans were stunned. Many were angry. It was one of the most talked about TV deaths of the decade. But why did Dan Stevens really walk away at the peak of his popularity? For him, the decision came down to something deeply personal. His contract was ending, and while he loved Downton, he feared being trapped in period dramas for the rest of his career. He wanted freedom. Freedom to try new roles, freedom to take risks, freedom to avoid the comfort zone that so many actors fall into when a single role defines them. In an interview years later, Stevens admitted it wasn't an easy choice. He had built friendships, fans adored him, and he knew his departure would leave scars on the show. But he was determined. So he left England behind, packed up his career, and set his sights on the United States. And here's where his gamble paid off. Instead of being remembered only as the handsome heir of Downton Abbey, Stevens reinvented himself. He played a troubled soldier hiding dark secrets in The Guest. He starred as a schizophrenic mutant in FX's Legion, a role that tested his range in extraordinary ways. He even explored dark comedy with Cuckoo and expanded his international recognition by joining epic franchises. Fans can look forward to seeing him again in Godzilla x Kong, Supernova as Trapper, proving he's still full of surprises. For Stevens, the exit that broke millions of hearts was the very thing that allowed him to grow. And yet his departure left creator Julian Fellowes scrambling, because at the very same time, another beloved star was preparing to say goodbye. Jessica Brown Findlay. She played Lady Sybil Crawley, the youngest daughter of the Crawley family. Sybil wasn't just a character. She was the symbol of hope and rebellion. From her bold fashion choices to her decision to marry the family chauffeur, Tom Branson, Sybil's spirit represented change in a world clinging desperately to tradition. So when her story came to an end, the loss cut deep. Her death during childbirth was one of the most gut-wrenching moments in Downton Abbey history. The cries of grief from her family, the raw panic of doctors unable to save her, the stunned silence of the household, every detail was unforgettable. Fans were shattered, and unlike Matthew's unexpected accident, Sybil's death was planned from the start. Findlay had made her intentions clear long before the cameras rolled. She signed a 3-year contract, and from day one, she knew she would leave at the end of it. For her, the fear wasn't of staying, but of stagnating. She didn't want comfort. She wanted challenge. She wanted to break free of the world that had embraced her so warmly and test her craft elsewhere. In her own words, she was terrified of falling into a comfort zone. That fear, as painful as it was for fans, pushed her to walk away. And here's the kicker. Had Julian Fellowes known sooner about Dan Stevens' decision? He admitted he might have killed Matthew and Sybil together in a car crash. Imagine that. Two of Downton's most beloved characters gone in one devastating blow, but instead their exits came separately, leaving audiences to grieve twice. Findlay's gamble, much like Stephen's, opened doors. She went on to star in Winter's Tale, Victor Frankenstein, and Brave New World. Each role pushed her further away from the sheltered walls of Highclere Castle and into the broader landscape of international cinema. The deaths of Matthew and Sybil may have broken Downton Abbey fans, but for Dan Stevens and Jessica Brown Findlay, those choices became stepping stones toward new careers. And yet, they weren't the only ones who walked away from the grandeur of the Crawleys. Another actor, known for his charm and wit, would also find himself stepping out of the Downton spotlight. Lady Mary Crawley never seemed destined for an easy love story. After losing Matthew, her first husband, fans held their breath as she tried to rebuild her life. Eventually, she found love again, this time with the dashing Henry Talbot, played by Matthew Goode. Henry was everything you might expect of Mary's second chance. Handsome, charming, and a man who lived for speed behind the wheel. He first appeared in the Season 5 Christmas special, quickly becoming part of Mary's world. By the end of Season 6, they were married, and when the first Downton Abbey film arrived, Henry was right there beside her. So imagine the shock when the sequel hinted at something fans never expected. Mary and Henry had quietly divorced. No grand confrontation, no fiery heartbreak scene, just a revelation that left audiences stunned. Why did Matthew Goode disappear from the Downton universe? Was it a creative choice? A clash behind the scenes? The truth is far less dramatic, but just as telling. Matthew Goode was simply too busy. Between major roles in shows like The Offer and Department Q, his schedule clashed with filming. Add to that a knee injury that required surgery, and it became clear Goode couldn't commit to the demands of the franchise. He later admitted with honesty that Henry's character was drifting toward irrelevance anyway. In his own words, Henry was edging toward becoming a wet lettuce. Perhaps the quiet exit was a blessing in disguise. Goode didn't need Downton to keep his career soaring. He has consistently taken on projects across film and television, from historical dramas to supernatural thrillers. Fans eager for something unexpected even got to see him share the screen with Dan Stevens again in the vampire film Abigail. Sometimes the paths of old castmates cross in ways no one could predict. But while Goode's absence was softened by his busy schedule, another departure from Downton carried a completely different weight. Rose Leslie. Before she became a household name as Ygritte in Game of Thrones, Rose Leslie stepped into the role of Gwen Dawson, a housemaid at Downton Abbey. Gwen was one of the rare characters who actually got a happy ending. Instead of being consumed by scandal or tragedy, she left to become a secretary and later returned in Season 6 as Mrs. Harding, the successful wife of a businessman. Her departure wasn't fueled by drama or contract disputes. Instead, Gwen's story had simply reached its natural conclusion. Rose Leslie herself explained that she always knew her character would leave with dignity and fulfillment. For her, Downton was a launching pad, a stepping stone into bigger opportunities. And what a launch it was. When Game of Thrones co-creator David Benioff spotted her in Downton, he was struck by her natural talent and accent. That casting choice changed her career forever. As Ygritte, she stole scenes and hearts alike with her fierce independence and fiery chemistry with Jon Snow, played by Kit Harington, who later became her husband in real life. Their romance moved from screen to reality, capturing headlines worldwide. Since then, Leslie has continued to prove her versatility. She starred in The Time Traveler's Wife, Vigil, and will soon appear in the upcoming miniseries The Hack. For Rose Leslie, leaving Downton Abbey wasn't an end. It was the beginning of an international career and a lifelong partnership with a fellow star. But not every departure came with such a clean ending. Some actors left quietly, without dramatic deaths or fairy tale conclusions. One such example was Ed Speleers, who played the mischievous and flirtatious Jimmy Kent. Jimmy joined Downton Abbey in Season 3 as a footman, turning heads with his charm and cheeky nature. His character brought tension when he became the object of Thomas Barrow's affections, and even more scandal when he was caught in a compromising position with Lady Struther. Eventually, Jimmy was dismissed from service, closing his chapter in the Crawley household. When the first Downton Abbey movie was announced, fans wondered if Jimmy might return for a cameo. But Ed Speleers confirmed he wouldn't be back. Why? Timing and storytelling. He was already committed to another project, and more importantly, Jimmy's story felt complete. Speleers himself admitted that it wouldn't have made sense to force him back into the narrative, yet stepping away from Downton didn't slow him down. Quite the opposite. Ed Speleers built an impressive resume with roles in Outlander, the psychological thriller You, and most recently Star Trek Picard. His theater work, including the stage production of Rain Man, further proved his range. For Speleers, Downton was just the start of a career that continues to surprise audiences with every new role. And this brings us to one of the most divisive characters of the entire series, a woman whose scheming and cruelty made her unforgettable, and whose departure left some fans relieved and others curious. Siobhan Finneran, better known as Sarah O'Brien. Few characters at Downton Abbey stirred up as much anger and fascination as Sarah O'Brien. Played by Siobhan Finneran, O'Brien was the maid who always had a sharp tongue, a secret scheme or a betrayal tucked up her sleeve. She manipulated, she gossiped, and she even caused one of the show's most heartbreaking tragedies by contributing to Lady Cora's miscarriage. So when O'Brien suddenly vanished after season 3, fans were left wondering what on earth had happened. Did the writers run out of storylines for her? Was there a falling out behind the scenes? The truth was far simpler, though no less final. Siobhan Finneran had only signed a 3-year contract, and by the time it ended, she felt her passion for the role had burned out. She admitted in an interview that while she had fun playing O'Brien, she no longer loved the part. And for her, once that spark was gone, there was no reason to stay. Her exit may have felt abrupt, but it was entirely her choice. Gareth Neame, one of the show's producers, later confirmed that nothing dramatic had happened. Finneran simply wanted to move on, and move on she did. Since Downton, Finneran has remained a powerful presence on British television. She's appeared in The Lock, The Stranger, and most famously, the gripping crime drama Happy Valley, where she plays Claire Cartwright. For her, leaving Downton wasn't about scandal. It was about preserving her love for acting by refusing to do something her heart was no longer in. But while O'Brien's departure was shocking, another familiar face left with far less drama, Cara Theobald, who played Ivy Stewart, the bright-eyed kitchen maid, joined Downton Abbey in season 3. Ivy was sweet, kind, and eager for more out of life. She found herself caught in a love triangle between Jimmy and Alfred, but her real ambition was bigger than romance. By the end of season 4, Ivy was offered the chance to start a new life in America as a cook, and she grabbed it with both hands. Unlike many other exits, Ivy's story closed on a hopeful note. But for Cara Theobald, Downton Abbey was never meant to be the end. In fact, it was her very first professional acting job. She admitted she had never even auditioned for a role before landing the part of Ivy. For her, Downton was a gift, a training ground where she built confidence and honed her craft. When her time on the show ended, she was ready to take that experience and leap forward, and she did. Since Downton, Theobald has worked across film, television, and even video games. She's appeared in series like Absentia and films like Around the Sun. But perhaps her most unique achievement has been her work as a voice actress. Gamers might not realize it, but she's the voice behind characters in titles like Overwatch and Heroes of the Storm. For Theobald, Downton Abbey opened a door that led not just to acting on screen, but to creating characters in entirely new worlds. And while Ivy's departure was gentle, William Mason's exit was anything but. Played by Thomas Howes, William was one of Downton's original footmen. Kind-hearted, loyal, and quietly in love with Daisy Robinson, William embodied the gentle soul who rarely found happiness in return. His love for Daisy went unreciprocated, but his loyalty never wavered. When the Great War broke out, William enlisted and became Matthew Crawley's soldier servant. And it was during one of the war's most harrowing battles that William made the ultimate sacrifice. He threw himself into danger to save Matthew, suffering fatal injuries in the process. His storyline ended in heartbreaking fashion, with Daisy marrying him on his deathbed out of pity and kindness, only for him to pass away shortly after. For fans, William's death was devastating. But unlike some other departures, this one wasn't about contracts or choices. It was simply the way his story had to end. Thomas Howes later admitted that while he understood the decision, it was emotional to walk away from the cast he'd grown close to. Actress Phyllis Logan, who played Mrs. Hughes, was reportedly in tears when reading the script that sealed William's fate. Howes himself returned to his roots after Downton, continuing his career in theater while also appearing in television dramas like Gentleman Jack and Jack the Ripper, the first serial killer. Though William's time at Downton was cut short, Howes's career has carried him far beyond the walls of the Crawley estate. But even among all these farewells, one actress's exit stood out for its shocking storyline and the tragic arc her character endured: Amy Nuttall, who played the troubled Ethel Parks. Among all the characters who came and went from Downton Abbey, few carried as much tragedy as Ethel Parks. Played by Amy Nuttall, Ethel entered the story in Season 2 as a maid with big dreams but very little luck. She was young, ambitious, and full of energy, but her life took a devastating turn that none of us could forget. Ethel's downfall began with a forbidden romance. She fell for Major Charles Bryant, a soldier recovering at Downton during the war. Their affair was short-lived, but it left lasting consequences. When Ethel became pregnant, Bryant refused to acknowledge the child, leaving her abandoned and disgraced. To make matters worse, she was fired from the household, shunned by polite society, and left to raise her baby alone. For most shows, that would have been the end of her story. A sad reminder of how harsh life could be for women in her position. Even Amy Nuttall herself believed her time on Downton was over. But creator Julian Fellowes wasn't finished with Ethel yet. She returned in Season 3, but the woman who came back was a shadow of the hopeful maid she once was. Desperate and broken, Ethel had turned to sex work just to survive. Her situation shocked viewers and added a gritty realism to the otherwise polished world of Downton Abbey. In the end, she made the most difficult choice of all, to let Major Bryant's wealthy parents raise her son, knowing he would have a better future without her. Ethel stayed nearby, working quietly, so she could still be close to him, even if she could never truly be his mother. It was one of the most painful arcs in the entire series. And for Amy Nuttall, it was also one of the most challenging roles of her career. She later shared that she had initially been told Ethel's story was finished, only to receive a surprise phone call from Fellowes saying he had more planned. That second chance allowed her to explore a character's suffering in raw, emotional detail. After Downton, Amy Nuttall continued her career across television and stage. But for many fans, she will always be remembered as Ethel, the maid whose tragic choices reminded us that not every story at Downton ended with wealth, love, or redemption. And that's what made the departures of these 9 actors so unforgettable. From Dan Stevens and Jessica Brown Findlay, who left at the height of their fame to chase new opportunities, to Matthew Goode and Rose Leslie, whose paths were shaped by timing and new roles, to Ed Speleers, Cara Theobald, Thomas Howes, Siobhan Finneran, and Amy Nuttall, each exit carried its own story. Some were heartbreaking, some were quiet. But all of them changed the show forever, because Downton Abbey wasn't just about who stayed. It was also about who left, and the lasting mark they left behind. Even now, years later, fans still debate which departure hurt the most. Was it Matthew's shocking car crash? Sybil's tragic death? William's sacrifice on the battlefield? Or perhaps the quiet, sudden disappearances of characters like O'Brien and Ivy? What's certain is that every goodbye, no matter how small, left an imprint on Downton Abbey's legacy. It reminded us that life inside the grand house was never safe from change, and that even in the midst of glittering dinners and family traditions, loss was always waiting around the corner. For the actors, those choices shaped their careers in ways both expected and surprising. Some soared to international stardom, Some found steady success in television and theater, and some discovered entirely new paths that no one could have predicted. That's the magic of Downton Abbey. It wasn't just a drama about a family and their servants. It was a launching pad for some of the most talented actors of their generation. And their stories, both on screen and off, continue to fascinate us long after the final curtain fell on the Crawley estate. So, the next time you revisit Downton Abbey and feel the sting of a favorite character's absence, remember this. Behind every goodbye was not just an ending, but also a beginning, a career reborn, a life reshaped, a choice that changed everything. And perhaps that's what kept Downton Abbey alive in our hearts long after the actors themselves walked away.